Welcome back to Network Africa. Do remember that all our top stories can be found on our website, channelstv.com, and on youtube.com/channelsweb. You can watch our videos, but do log on to m.channelstv.com to view us live on your mobile device. You can also download the Channels TV app for Android, iOS, and Windows phones from their respective stores. And the United States says it has stopped flying drones from southern Ethiopia in its campaign against the militants in Somalia and Yemen at the request of the government. That's the Ethiopian government. Well, it spent millions of dollars in 2011 on upgrading an airfield in the town of Araba Minch, from where it launched Reaper drones that can carry Hellfire missiles and satellite-guided bombs. The airfield is the only U.S. drone base acknowledged by the Ethiopian government to exist in the country. On Tuesday, officials and U.S. diplomats confirmed the end of drone activities there. Ethiopia is one of Washington's key allies and is considered a bulwark against militant Islam in the region. Troops in the country have been fighting Al-Qaeda-allied Al-Shabaab militants in Somalia since 2011 as part of an African Union peacekeeping mission. Meanwhile, Ethiopia could be facing a worsening humanitarian disaster as it begins to cope with the El Nino weather. The World Food Programme is warning humanitarian needs have increased because of scorching weather and rising temperatures.
Low rainfall linked to El Nino is expected to lead to more months of drought in parts of Africa, particularly in East Africa. Ethiopia, one of the worst-hit countries, is already experiencing its worst drought in decades. El Nino-related drought has decimated food crops and led to poor harvests in the country, and farmers, experts, say that 8.2 million Ethiopians are in need of food aid. Most of those affected by drought live in rural areas and depend on agriculture and livestock for their livelihoods and food. The World Food Programme warned on Monday that humanitarian needs in Ethiopia had increased since the beginning of 2015 due to the El Nino weather phenomenon. Stefan Dujarric is the spokesperson for the United Nations Secretary General in Ethiopia.
The World Food Programme is saying today that humanitarian needs in Ethiopia have tripled since the beginning of 2015, as severe drought in some regions exacerbate the strongest El Nino in decades, cause successive harvest failures and widespread livestock death. Out of 10 million people now requiring urgent humanitarian assistance, the World Food Programme is expected to support the government in meeting the needs of 7.6 million people in 2016. Yet so far, less than 5% of the resources required for the first 6 months of the year are available.
Failed rains during the spring and summer have sparked food and water shortages in the Horn of Africa nation, which boasts one of the continent's highest growth rates, but depends heavily on rain-fed farming. El Nino, marked by warm sea surface temperatures in the Pacific Ocean, causes extremes such as scorching weather in some regions of the globe and heavy rains and flooding in others. Meteorologists expect El Nino to peak between October and January. The government of Ethiopia recently unveiled a comprehensive plan to respond to the immediate needs of those most affected, with the international community pledging $300 million. However, an estimated $1.4 billion for emergency food, clean water, and nutrition, as well as health, is needed to help save the lives of the most vulnerable.
The World Food Programme also says that the government is leading a well-coordinated response and has devoted enormous resources of its own to addressing the growing humanitarian needs, but that the crisis in the scale urgently requires significant support from the international community.
African countries are being encouraged to take up change adaptation efforts, such as planting new trees and improving soil and water conservation, among other things, to respond to disaster forecasts.
Proposed peace talks by Eastern African leaders in Burundi have been postponed following Burundi's refusal to participate. The talks, which opened in Uganda late last month, were set to continue today in Arusha, Tanzania. but have been postponed indefinitely with no word on when they will resume. Burundi's foreign ministry had yesterday said the government will not be participating because there had been no agreement on the date, because most of the countries believed lies that it was supporting violence that has plagued the country since May last year. Also, Burundi's leading opposition coalition, Sinared, says it did not receive any invitation to the talks. Tension has run especially high since the African Union last month said it may deploy up to 5,000 peacekeepers in Burundi to stop the violence. The government has said the troops will be attacked if they attempt to come without permission. The latest violence began when President Pierre Nkurunziza announced in April last year that he would be running a third term in office. The VOA's Jill Craig joins us now from Nairobi, Kenya, with more on the failed proposed peace talks. Jill, thank you for joining us on Network Africa this afternoon. What was the reason that the meeting did not hold today? I know Burundi had pulled out, but why did the Eastern African leaders pull out eventually? I'm hoping you can hear me, Jill. What was the reason the meeting did not hold today, even though Burundi did pull out, but why did the other East African leaders fail to meet today as agreed?
Yes, sorry for that. My electricity just went off here. I apologize. Yes, so today the meeting did not go off as planned, and we believe it's because the government said that it refused to meet with opposition parties and groups that it claims were responsible for the recent violence. So as a result, the talks were off the table for today, and at this point we are not quite sure when they'll be going back on.
Well, as we did mention, the Burundian government said it would not be participating in the talks because they had no clear dates. Well, that was the excuse of the government. But what do East African leaders intend to do now that the country has shown no signs of cooperating?
That's a great question. And as you're well aware, many of these East African leaders themselves have not abided by term limits the way that some people would have liked. So I think for many of the leaders, it's a bit of an awkward situation. President Museveni may be one of those. He's actually in charge of these talks on behalf of the East African community. And today, he said that the talks would not be resuming tomorrow, and he was unclear as to when they would resume. One of the original plans was to have another round of talks on January 16th. And as of this time, those talks probably will not happen, and I don't think that anyone really expects them to.
Well, so we're seeing regional leaders meeting and regrouping and trying to resolve what's going on in Burundi, but are there other close allies of Burundi who may be trying to intervene in the talks?
Right. Well, there's a few things there. One, as many of your viewers are aware, the African Union has said that they're going to be putting 5,000 troops on the ground in Burundi. That happened last month that they made that announcement, and President Nkurunziza responded that those are his country's borders, and if they go into those borders, that would be an illegal move according to his constitution, and that therefore he would fight back in kind. He also said that citizens of Burundi do not want these armed forces from the African Union coming in. So that caused a bit of some ruffled feathers last month. Additionally, there have also been talks with the EU, with the UN, as I mentioned, the East Africa community, and the United Nations Security Council also had a resolution last month, in November, that basically said that they wanted the parties to engage in more dialogue. And so people have been discussing what dialogue means and if that's even possible at this point. But those are sort of some of the entities that have a vested interest in making sure that Burundi can get back to normal, to become safe again, to not have this bloodshed in the streets every day. And I think that, people are really trying to come up with some sort of solution here.
Very quickly, Jill, is the Kenyan government also involved in these talks or in this intervention?
Not officially. We're not hearing stories of President Kenyatta coming out one way or the other per se. However, I would not discount the idea that he probably is having talks with other leaders, if not Nkurunziza specifically, perhaps President Museveni as a fellow member of the East African community. So I don't believe that officially he is, but like I said, I would not be surprised if there are talks that are going on.
Thanks again, Jill, for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
The VOA's Jill Craig from Nairobi, Kenya. Still ahead on Network Africa. Health officials in Taraba State, northern Nigeria, unsure that what they've been dealing with is really Lassa fever. Stay with us.